The cost was $40,000. The documentation was 1 page. The space it sealed had been accessible for over a century. A grand civic hall in the American Midwest, 3 stories of limestone and marble. According to every record, it had no notable sublevel. But in the basement, behind a wall that architectural logic said should lead somewhere, was a door. Iron. Set into stone. Welded shut. And next to it, solid concrete. Not structural reinforcement. A pour. A deliberate, coordinated final pour. A pour. A deliberate, coordinated final pour. Not because of what might be behind it, but because of the question it demanded. Who seals a space that officially does not exist? Why certain doors are bricked over? You're asking the right questions. This channel tracks the records they sealed. The official story of 19th century architecture is one of progress. Cities grew, populations expanded, and enlightened governments built magnificent public structures. That narrative appears in every heritage pamphlet. Grand civic structures appeared across multiple continents within decades. Ornate train stations, city halls, customs houses, and exhibition palaces with ceilings designed for a scale that seems disproportionate to any stated purpose. The deeper you look, there is a lower level. Not always accessible. In fact, almost never accessible. Sometimes bricked over, sometimes flooded, and sometimes, most interestingly, filled solid with concrete. The question that changes everything is not what lies beneath these buildings. The question is, why did the sealing happen at the same time? Across dozens of cities on multiple continents, in the early 1920s, with particular concentration around 1922 and 1923, there was a sudden coordinated effort to seal, fill, or permanently close the lower levels of these structures. Not repurposed, sealed, permanently. The pattern repeats across borders, across political systems, across competing empires, all arriving at the same solution within the same window of time. Contain line items described almost uniformly as foundation stabilization projects, sub-basement remediation, or infrastructural normalization. No architect or civil engineer has been able to provide a consistent definition for this term. The answers range from vague to contradictory, perfectly reasonable, except the quantities of concrete involved make that explanation collapse. A well-constructed void, properly reinforced at its edges, is often more structurally sound than an indiscriminate pour. It makes that space permanently inaccessible. Once sealed, there is no reopening without demolishing the structure above. Where are the engineering surveys that would have preceded these fills? Every significant construction project generates paperwork. Surveys, photographs, structural assessments, reports to municipal authorities, invoices from concrete suppliers. For the vast majority of these foundation stabilization projects, those records are either absent, incomplete, or suspiciously uniform, almost as though generated from a template. Someone sat down and decided that all of these projects across all of these cities should be described in exactly the same way, the same language, the same scope, the same deliberate vagueness. Consider the great railway stations built in the mid to late 19th century, not just their style, but their specific proportions, specific ornamental vocabularies, specific relationships between public space and what lies beneath. Vaulted ceilings at particular heights, columns spaced at particular intervals, platforms set at particular depths below grade. The uniformity goes far beyond aesthetic preference. The official explanation is the international spread of Beaux-Arts design principles. Students traveled, pattern books circulated, architects corresponded across borders. On its surface, not unreasonable. But the problem is the timing. You do not just import a design philosophy. You import specific measurements, specific structural choices that go far beyond aesthetics into something that looks like a pre-existing system being adapted. This raises a critical question. What were these buildings built on top of? Not near, not adjacent to, on top of. The evidence points to pre-existing subterranean infrastructure, a network of underground spaces that the buildings of the 19th century did not create, but rather occupied, incorporated, and used as foundations. Space whose original function was either unknown to the builders or deliberately obscured, and then in the early 1920s sealed permanently. The budget records confirm the timing, but they do not explain the reason. Why the 1920s specifically? The most common response that this period saw widespread modernization of urban infrastructure is true, but it is incomplete. It never has in any other area of construction, unless what came before was something you needed to be permanently inaccessible. In the sections that were sealed rather than filled, the portions bricked over or gated but not buried in concrete, what remains is not what you would expect from 19th century construction. Different cutting techniques, different stone types, and a precision of fitting that defies the tools officially available at the time of the building's supposed construction. The joints are too tight, the angles are too true. The stones are shaped in ways that serve structural purposes far beyond decorative need. Who built these lower levels? When? With what tools? The 19th century was the great age of photography. Cameras documented everything. Streets, families, disasters, construction projects. Thousands of photographs show civic buildings going up, workers posing on scaffolding, dedication ceremonies. Almost no photographs of the excavation phase, not underdocumented, almost entirely undocumented. In an era when photographers documented specific city streets in 1868, specific factories in 1877, specific railway platforms in 1881, the excavation of sublevels is a photographic void. What was there to hide from a camera during the excavation phase that was not there to hide during the construction of the facade? Absences are evidence. And then there are the labor records. Every major construction project has payroll records, union records, newspaper coverage of disputes and completion milestones. These buildings have all of this for the levels above ground. Workers on the lower portions appear without specificity, names sometimes in aggregate payroll entries but rarely with biographical detail, as though they were managed separately, kept separate. As though whoever was directing the work did not want a clear accounting of who had been underground and what they had seen. Foundations deeper than necessary, subterranean footings extending further than any engineer would have specified. The official explanation: 19th century engineers built conservatively, a safety margin. But a safety margin does not have rooms. A safety margin does not have corridors. A safety margin does not have the precisely cut stone and too tight joints that keep appearing in sections that were not built by 19th century contractors at all. It was already there. The construction crews of the 1850s and 1860s, whether they knew it or not, built on top of it, and around it, and eventually over it. Events happened and were written down, preserved in archives, eventually organized by scholars into a coherent narrative, a decision about what to keep and what to discard, what to highlight and what to quietly set aside. Every archive is also a set of absences. When we find a pattern of erasure, a geographically distributed, temporally concentrated pattern that corresponds to the sealing of specific types of physical spaces, the question becomes whether this is coincidence or intention. In 1923, what was worth protecting? Not from us, not from posterity. What in the early 1920s was sufficiently threatening that it justified the resources, the coordination, the deliberate obscuring of a physical record. A physical record. Stone and masonry, and the silent geometry of spaces built by hands that history does not account for. The official explanation, that this was mundane urban modernization, requires us to believe they thought so little of what they were sealing that they did not bother to document it, did not photograph it, did not take even a cursory record. Or is that exactly what you do when the thing you are sealing is something you need the future to have no clear evidence of? In the sections where the concrete pour stopped 3 feet short, in the buildings where the brick wall was not quite thick enough, in the photographs that were not quite suppressed, the sealing events required coordination across international borders, across competing political systems, across dozens of municipal jurisdictions, all arriving at the same solution, all within the same window. Something coordinated this. Something with reach across national boundaries, with authority over municipal engineering departments, with access to resources the surviving records dramatically underrepresent. The ability of future generations to read the material record of the world that existed before. The line items are there for anyone to read. Foundation stabilization, sub-basement remediation, infrastructural normalization. The costs are documented. The spaces are not. The masonry remains beneath the concrete, beneath the bricks, beneath the official narratives, waiting for the right questions. Every seal, broken,